Hello, welcome everyone. So today we're gonna have a presentation so that you guys can understand the notion of intersectionality and what is um, being intersected, what things are crossing. So the word intersectionality comes from intersection. So things are crossing, okay? So we're basically going to focus on three concepts: race, class, and ethnicity. First of all, class and race. Class is a social construct, establishes categories and distinctions among groups. And race is also a social construct that establishes categories and distinctions among groups. So what is this? The same? Is the same meaning, but both? So first we're gonna also see the distinctions between race versus ethnicity. So ethnicity is understood in the social sciences as referring to culture, history, and origins of a non-biological, non-natural kind. And race is generally a concept often defined in terms of a combinations of references to biology, physical appearance, like skin color, etc., nature, heredity, or an internal natural essence of some kind. This understanding of race is a remnant of Darwinism, of the idea of evolution. However, race is a social construct, as I said in the previous slide. An identity is based on rules made by society. So societies, different nations, different societies define or create an understanding of race. While it can be partially based on physical similarities within groups, race does not establish inherent physical or biological differences among people. So the idea that I want you to have very clear in your minds is that race is not about biology, meaning it's not natural. It's not a thing that we have for the rest of our lives and we cannot change it. Okay? Race has been created as a concept that pretends to perpetuate the idea that the human species is divided into distinct groups on the basis of inherited physical and behavioral differences. This idea of race is an idea that creates the distinctions of some are superior and others are inferior. So that's why it is a failed concept. Genetic studies in the late 20th century refuted the existence of biogenetically distinct races. So this is another demonstration of why race is a failed concept. The concept has no biological validity. Races then are cultural interventions, reflecting specific attitudes and beliefs that were imposed on different populations in the wake of Western European conquest beginning in the 15th century with colonization. So the idea of race is the result of the colonial endeavor. The idea of race began to evolve in terms of intellectually in the late 17th century after the beginning of the European exploration and colonization, as a folk ideology about human differences associated with different populations. In comparison, Europeans in comparison with Amerindians and in comparison with Africans, which were all brought together in the New World. So in this sense, you can see it is the history of colonization that brought together these three different groups of people from different origins in one space, the New World, and the contrast was evident, So in this sense, race is a social construct, is a historical construct. So what is race and why do we use it? First of all, race is not biological. The idea of race being defined by biology, meaning being natural, is the result of colonization, as I was saying, the result of Europe's expansion into other regions of the world, where they define anything other, any other group as less civilized, as savage, and Europeans as superiors. And because Europeans were white, then white became understood as a race and a superior race. In the 19th century, evolutionist views um, just reinforce this understanding of race as seen as a natural human fact that explain human diversity and justify the idea of European superiority and domination. Once slavery was abolished in the 19th century, the ideology fully emerged as a new mechanism of social division and stratification. In this sense, again, race is then a historical construct to refer and classify groups of people and justify racism. And this is, again, while it is a failed concept. Race theory paradigms in the US. So there's different ways in which race is talked about, experienced in the US. This from the biologist perspective, no, which I think tends to be general, or there's a combination of misconceptions. So this idea of race as a natural human fact, no. Another understanding is as ethnicity, no, where you can see mixing it as between physical facts, physical traits, and cultural traits together, no. But we can also understand this idea of ethnicity as a common history, no. And then the other way that we need to understand it here is the conflation of class and race, which we see now clearly in the social justice movement. And this is one form of intersectionality when we're talking about race, and then we need to bring in class and put them together, and then we'll see how there's a tendency for groups of people of color or ethnic groups to match a certain class stratification. So race and racial theories. Dominant racial theories provide societies with a form of categorization. Racial theory is shaped by actually existing relations in any given historical period, where a particular racial theory is dominant. In this sense, racial theory means how are we making sense of the existence of the idea of race and of race relations among groups that are constructed as racial groups, no? Now, intersectionality. So I want you to look at this diagram over here, and you see the different categories: ethnicity, race, which we were talking about, sex and gender, education, and then you can see religion, age, disability, geography, culture, incomes, which would be class, one part of class, sexual orientation, education, so all a disability. So all of these markers, and then there's others that we can add, intersect, no? And intersectionality would be the way we examine how these elements are connecting and what is affecting a person, no? or a group of people. So intersectionality examines how various biological, social, and cultural categories such as gender, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, religion, age, nationality, and other spectrums of identity interact on multiple and often simultaneous levels in a person's life. It proposes that we should think of each element or trait of a person as inextricably linked with all the other elements, meaning we cannot separate, well, let's just focus on race, let's just focus on religion, let's just focus on gender. No, we need to always connect, no? This framework can be used to understand how systemic injustice and social inequality occur on a multidimensional basis. So, for example, we can see how communities of color tend to live in neighborhoods that are more exposed to environmental hazards, um, to have less parks, for example, less green areas, and lower income groups. No? So, and that also leads to the schools having less funding, which then leads to less people going to college. So all of that, I just crossed a lot of elements. No, intersectional theory asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression. So what we're gonna focus here is which are the systems of oppression. No? So patriarchy is one. No? So that we focus on gender, gender identity, and gender relations, and the main system of oppression is patriarchy. No? Then class, then the system of oppression, the class relations, no, and the economic system that creates these classes, and the people that have more resources and define all the policies that will later affect the working class, no, and then race as also groups of people that are um, grouped in categories that are put on upon them by the dominant groups. No? So this other diagram is good to show you how intersectionality comes in a person's life. No? So all these elements are part of a person or a group, no? And then it will define the outcomes in their lives, no? Or their possibilities or the options they have. So each individual experiences social structure slightly differently because the intersection of their identities reflect an intersection of overlapping oppressions. Therefore, sweeping generalizations about the struggle or power of a particular social group fail to recognize that individuals in the group also belong to other social groups and may experience other forms of marginalization. So, for example, you can have a group, working class, they're part of a union, uh, but the union only focuses on the labor contract, but for example, fails to see that the women that participate in the union have specific needs for in their working environment that stem from their um, their sexed body, and then they need specific, or from the gender, so they need specific things in the work environment. I mean, that could be just one example. Um, so intersectionality is about fighting discrimination within discrimination, tackling inequalities within inequalities, and protecting minorities within minorities. So not because we are fighting for gender equality are we gonna miss that within that fight there's other subgroups that we need to also focus. So this is in general just a general framework for you to think everything you read, here in this class and in Chicano 141B. This is one of the frameworks we're going to use, and then it will help you understand more the present and current situations, but also through the history that we're going to learn in Chicano 141A, we can see how history is the one that is creating this intersectionality. Okay,